And the battle for the Syrian city of Aleppo has intensified after a Russian unilateral ceasefire expired. Undated videos uploaded online on Sunday and Monday by Syrian military media were described as showing heavy clashes with armed groups in the area southwest of the city. And the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said fighting was continuing in the area. Russia declared a three-day humanitarian pause starting from Thursday, but it was rejected by rebels and did not result in hoped-for medical evacuations from the city or aid deliveries. And Aleppo has been a major battleground in the Syrian conflict, which is now in its sixth year.
The Iraqi Joint Operations Command has denied reports that security forces halted their advance towards the city of Mosul. Brigadier General Yahya Rasul said there was no suspension of military operations to retake the ISIL stronghold in Iraq. He said the military was reorganizing and redeploying units after having freed dozens of villages and towns. The counter-terrorism forces are waiting for other troops north and south of the city who are still fighting to advance to their positions. Earlier in the day, the Pentagon said Iraqi forces suspended their advance toward Mosul to clear ISIL supporters and booby traps.
As Iraqi forces advance on Mosul, alarming reports are emerging that Islamic State group fighters are kidnapping residents to be used as human shields. The UN Human Rights Agency says those resisting IS have been shot on the spot.
ISIL's depraved, cowardly strategy is to attempt to use the presence of civilian hostages to render certain points, areas, or military forces immune from military operations, effectively using tens of thousands of women, men, and children as human shields.
Military leaders say it will be a tough battle to dislodge the militants from the city. The Islamic State group has built an extensive tunnel network and planted a large number of booby traps meant to slow the advancing forces. Meanwhile, aid agencies are warning this could turn into a huge humanitarian crisis.
Mosul itself, there could be a worst-case scenario where more than 1 million people are impacted by the military campaign. The United Nations is projecting that the humanitarian operation in Mosul will be the most complex and the largest in the world in 2016.
In the next few weeks, the UN expects around 200,000 people to flee the area.
Good evening. We begin in the Syrian city of Aleppo, where 15 civilians are reported to have been killed and dozens of others injured as rebel factions carried out a counter-attack against the army and its allies. Well, their goal is to try and break the siege on the east of the city, and Russian media sources say that the defense ministry in Moscow has asked the Kremlin for the green light for fresh airstrikes there, in what was once Syria's biggest city. But President Vladimir Putin has just said that the timing is not right. Well, Western powers are concerned that some of those leading the offensive there in Aleppo are jihadist organizations such as Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, which are considered by many countries to be a terrorist organization. Well, for more, we can cross now to our regional correspondent, Michael Downey, who joins us from Beirut. Michael, what's the latest from across the border there in Aleppo, and what sort of gains are the rebels making at the moment?
Well, today they made a slight gains in the Assad district. They actually overran partial government lines, and this is the most significant gain they've had since they first made a brief corridor in August, breaking the siege which began in July.
Okay, so very limited gains indeed by the sounds of things. But for people who are trapped inside the east of Aleppo, 270,000 of them or so, supplies of food and medicine are running out very fast. What do you know about the humanitarian situation there?
The amount of food, medical supplies is quite dire in East Aleppo. Hospitals have been targeted, so medical supplies is one of the most needed things there, and of course food. This is not aside from the rebels needing more arms on the inside. The civilian aspect is very troubling. But what's notable is that most of these attacks are coming from the outside. They are rebel factions trying to break through to help their comrades on the inside of East Aleppo. But what makes this particularly different is that all rebel factions are taking place in this offensive, and it seems that they have a astounding amount of Grad missiles and rockets. They fired hundreds alone today and laid quite a bit of damage to West Aleppo.
Okay, well, thanks for bringing us up to speed, Michael Downey in Beirut there with the latest on what's happening across the border in Syria. Well, with that situation in Aleppo at the top of their agenda, the Iranian, Russian and Syrian foreign ministers held three-way talks in Moscow earlier on today, after which they agreed to intensify their efforts in the war-torn country, vowing to stamp out what they called terrorism. Well, speaking to reporters after their meeting, the Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov reiterated Moscow's denial that its warplanes struck a school in Idlib province, killing 22 children and 6 teachers. He also said that greater efforts are going to be made to allow civilians access to humanitarian aid.
We are still ready to reinstate the ceasefire in Aleppo and the surrounding area, but only if we get guarantees that people will be able to benefit from it.
I am pleased that in recent years, relations between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Russian Federation, two good neighbors and two key players in the region, have made a lot of positive progress together.
There was a major fire today on an American Airlines 767 as it was taking off from Chicago for Miami. There were 170 people on board. At least 8 were injured, but none seriously. Dean Reynolds is at O'Hare Airport.
Plumes of smoke and shooting flames could be seen billowing from the right side of American Airlines Flight 383 after it came to rest on runway 28R just after 2:30 p.m. Air traffic control shut down the airport.
American's engine burst into flame on the rollout.
Gary Schiavone was a passenger.
First there was a clunk. After the clunk, the explosion, and then the plane stopped real fast, and we all just started exiting.
Let's go!
Inside, there was panic.
Go!
Passengers, realizing the plane was on fire, began to shout for others to get out quickly.
Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
The 161 passengers and crew were forced to escape down evacuation slides on the left side of the plane, scattering to get as far away from the burning fuselage as possible.
Oh my God.
Federal Aviation Administration officials say the Boeing 767 blew a tire while taking off, and when the pilots tried to abort, the engine caught fire. Emergency crews quickly raced to the scene. When the smoke cleared, you could see the fire-blackened back half of the plane and melted right wing. The 8 injured included 7 passengers and 1 crew member. They were all transported to local hospitals with minor injuries. Scott, the National Transportation Safety Board is sending investigators.
Dean Reynolds.
Heavily armed attackers wearing suicide vests stormed the Pakistani Police Academy Monday night in the southwestern city of Quetta. Government officials said at least 59 people were killed and 117 others were wounded. 5 to 6 gunmen raided a dormitory where some 200 trainees were resting and sleeping. Some were also taken hostage. An operation to clear the facility lasted 5 hours. Among these assaults was the deadliest in Pakistan since the suicide bomber killed 70 people at a hospital in the same day 2 months ago.
Russia is sending more warships to Syria for operations against extremist groups. The naval destroyer Smitlivi has departed from the Crimean port of Sevastopol. The heavily armed ship is heading for the Greek port of Piraeus before it joins its battle group in Syria. The vessel took part in previous operations in Syria back in 2013 and 2015. Meanwhile, a Russian naval fleet is also on its way to the Mediterranean Sea. The fleet includes Russia's only aircraft carrier, Kuznetsov, a cruiser and several destroyers.
Violence erupted during protests over the controversial Dakota Access oil pipeline. Activists set fire to debris on a bridge yesterday to stop police from clearing their camp. Officers made more than 140 arrests. Barry Peterson is in Cannonball, North Dakota, the site of the confrontation. Barry, good morning.
Good morning. Well, there was a chance this could have turned deadly. A woman was arrested for allegedly firing at police, but the police said they did not shoot back.
Stand up, rise up, find your warrior spirit.
The bitter protest continued into the evening, with protesters setting a bonfire on a bridge. Protesters who challenged police were arrested.
Over 300 riot police came. They came with force and they bulldozed the camp, they bulldozed teepees.
They maced people today, they tased them in the face. President Obama needs to stop this pipeline from happening.
Ending a day of ongoing confrontation, protesters who challenged police were arrested. Police obviously have the upper hand here. They're armed, they've got billy clubs. They also had pepper spray, beanbag guns, and a long-range acoustic device, blasting high-pitched tones used to disperse crowds in riots. Activist Jonathan Edwards was on the front lines. Jonathan, how does this end?
We win. They don't build this pipeline, and these guys get charged with human rights violations for the way they've been treating people.
The roughly 1,200-mile pipeline will carry crude oil from the Bakken oil field to Illinois. Native Americans are angry about plans to tunnel it under the Missouri River. A leak would damage what they consider a tribal lifeline and pollute water for millions of Americans downstream. North Dakota's Governor Jack Dalrymple had mobilized the state's National Guard to end the protest.
We cannot allow our state highways and our county highways to be taken over by agitators from other areas of the country.
The Native Americans and the environmentalists vow to fight on. You can see they have a blockade on the road just down there. But the state government and the owners of the pipeline are just as determined this pipeline is going to be built.
All right, got it, Barry. Thank you.